My name is Vesper, 18 years old. November pushed its breath through the cracks of our old house, that kind of metallic cold that turns your lungs into mirrors. My father's hands were on the kitchen table, knuckles pale, veins roped, a tremor he'd always call too much coffee, except tonight it wasn't caffeine. It was fury trying to look like conviction. My mother stood behind him, fingers pressed to the edge of the chair he'd claimed for years, like a throne, her face arranged into a quiet I didn't recognize. In my arms, my 3-day-old son quivered against my chest, all warmth and milk sour, and the smallest heartbeat I'd ever felt. "Get out," my father said, low and level, as if he were reciting scripture he'd practiced. The word didn't rise, it burrowed. Get out. A week ago, he'd called this place our home, pointing at the ceiling while getting the ornaments down, humming the first lines of a carol. Tonight it was just his house, and I was just a stain. "Dad," I said, pulling the blanket higher around my son's delicate skull. "Just one night. I'll make a plan tomorrow. Tonight let me be—" "You should have planned before," he cut in, pushing back his chair. The scrape shot sparks up my spine. "Before you shamed us. Before you decided to keep it." It. My son stirred at the sound like even he knew when a word meant harm. I tucked him closer. He smelled like soap and something holy. My mother's voice, thin as tissue, tried to exist. "Richard!" He carved the air with a palm. We offered solutions. We offered the clinic. We offered adoption. She made a choice. They'd always taught me about mercy at Riverside Baptist. Third pew from the front. Mom in pressed skirts. Dad singing louder than anyone. Me and my little brother Jacob passing notes in the margins of hymnals. Grace had rules, apparently, and I was now an exception clause. I looked to my mother because I wanted one soft thing to hang the night on. "He's your grandson," I said. My voice shocked me. Steady, small, a straight line through a hurricane. Her eyes slipped closed like a door. That was her answer. My father stepped toward me, and for a flash too fast to be reasonable, I thought he might hit me. He never had. He didn't now. He reached past, grabbed my purse, shoved it into my free hand. 5 minutes, he said, checking his watch as if timing my exile made it administrative. "Whatever you can carry." I climbed the stairs like they belonged to someone else. My room still held a photograph from prom, the stupid glittered sign from graduation, my acceptance letter pinned beside a mobile we'd hung above a second-hand crib. Evidence of 2 lives colliding in one window, the girl I'd been and the mother I'd become. My hands were too clumsy for buttons. I stuffed clothes into a bag one-armed while cradling my son, dropped things twice, said sorry to no one, to nothing, to the air. Footsteps padded in the hall. Jacob, 12, suddenly wiry, a boy who'd grown too fast during the months everyone pretended I was just not feeling myself. He stood in the doorway with his eyes shining like he'd learned a new way to cry. "Vess," he whispered, as if speaking my name might break something delicate. "Don't go. I'll talk to them." "You can't fix a wall that never set," I said, pulling him into a crooked hug. Bubblegum and sweat and notebook paper. "Still my brother." "It's not on you. Where will you go?" Genuine question, no judgment. He had not learned that yet. "Somewhere with heat," I said, a lie dressed as a plan. "Time," my father shouted from below. "I love you," Jacob said, voice cracking like ice. "I'll find you when I'm older, I promise." "Do not promise what the world can break," I wanted to tell him. Instead, I said, "Okay, because sometimes hope is the only thing with teeth." Downstairs, my parents were 2 statues trained to look human. My father held the front door open, November climbing the threshold like a stray. The neighborhood noticed. Of course it did. Curtains tilted. The Hendersons' porch light came on. Mrs. Chin outside pretended to check mail at 9:30 p.m. Because in our town, voyeurism dressed itself as good manners. "Please," I tried one more time, because this was the night for impossible prayers. "I'll sleep in the garage. You won't even—" "You did this to yourself," my father said, and turned the deadbolt against me. The sound was small, but it was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I stood on the porch where I'd posed for photos, where we'd strung lights each December, where I'd learned the geometry of goodbye. The blanket was too thin. The socks from the hospital were already wet. My son cried, a keening newborn sound full of apocalypse, and I started walking because moving was the only thing nobody could forbid. The sidewalk bit through the fuzz at my feet. By the end of the block, the socks were bleeding. By the end of the next, my cheeks were. I pressed my palm to Jacob's lit window, watching his shadow press back like a promise he didn't know how to keep. I kept moving. 6 blocks to the gas station. Fluorescent light peeled the night off me. The woman at the counter, Brenda on the name tag, varnish chipped on her nails, kindness living behind tired eyes, took one look at my arms, my baby, my everything in a bag, and came around without asking permission. "Honey, you okay?" she said, low and normal, like this was fixable. "I need to sit," I said, "just for a minute." She guided me to a plastic chair behind the counter and poured coffee I wouldn't drink. She pretended not to notice when I started crying. I pretended my shoulders weren't shaking. "I got kids," she said simply. "I know that look." She wrote an address on a receipt and pressed it into my palm. "Martha's Haven. You can walk it, 3 miles. They'll take you even if you got nothing but bones and a baby." An offer is a door, and I had just been locked out of one. I left with a pair of mismatched flip-flops from the Lost and Found that felt like mercy, and a chocolate bar I tried to refuse but failed to return because my son would need me to keep standing. The night was worse now that I had briefly tasted warm air again. Each block stretched into a county. The baby's cries went from alarm to hiccups to a small, rhythmic grief. At a park bench near a dead swing set, I curled around him the way a body learns to become architecture. I sang. Half lullabies, half the names of constellations I used to trace on tests I aced, as if Orion could keep us from freezing. A police cruiser ghosted past without stopping. Somewhere a dog barked at what might have been the moon. I thought about the kitchen and the pew and the letters that said congratulations when the world still made sense. I thought about the boy whose last text arrived the day I told him he'd become a father. Scene, then silence, then a number that would never work again. I thought about my mother's eyelids making the shape of absence. Rage might have kept me warm if I'd had any left to burn. All I had was a baby and a streetlight and a map to a house I didn't know yet. Dawn found us limping. Martha's Haven was a sagging Victorian with a porch light that had learned endurance. A crooked shutter blinked in the wind, and the sign promised what its paint could barely hold, a safe place for mothers and children. I stood at the bottom stair and stared at a bell I could ring that might change everything. My son stirred, mouth rooting, the animal ache of a life that had no idea how many decisions would be made for him by people who claimed to love God more than blood. I climbed the steps. The woman who opened the door wore cat pajamas and a sweatshirt that said, "World's okayest mom," which was either a joke or a requirement. Her face was the kind that had seen everything and learned not to flinch. "Come on in, sweetheart," she said, stepping aside like I belonged. "I'm Deb." Inside smelled like disinfectant and Tuesday's curry and a dozen kinds of fear trying to become hope. Bulletin board of rules, a rack of donated coats, the hum of a too-old fridge. Deb sat me in a closet that thought it was an office and slid a clipboard across. "State wants the answers," she said. "We'll deal with the questions later." I wrote with a hand that couldn't stop shaking. Name, address, none. Father's name, unknown to the forms, known to me. Income, none. Emergency contact, blank. I said my son's name out loud for the first time since the porch to a stranger in cartoon cats, and the sound of it carved a small doorway in the dark. While I wrote, Deb watched my baby like she was taking inventory of miracles. 3 days, she murmured. Lord. "I can work," I said, like an apology. "Nights, days, I'll do anything." She cocked her head. "You already did anything," she said. "Now you can do something." She handed me a key on a blue tag with the number 12. A bed, a crib, a shower schedule, and some women who will love you like family on good days and hate you like family on bad ones. Welcome to the in-between. I followed the sound of baby's breath and whispered arguments up a narrow staircase, past a window with bars painted over in cheerful white. The hall walls bloomed with hand-cut paper stars, lopsided and hopeful. Someone had written across them in a child's scrawl, "Every journey begins with a single step." I wanted to tear it down for being smug and right at the same time. Room 12 was 2 twin beds, a crib, a dresser with a swollen drawer, and a girl my age with braids and eyes like uncompromising mirrors. "Fresh meat," she said, not unkindly. "I'm Keisha. You snore. You're dead. Your baby cry. You owe me coffee. I laughed, and it surprised all three of us. That first morning, after I laid my son in a crib that had held 100 babies before him and would hold 100 after, I stood at the window and looked out at a town that would gossip about me by noon. I pressed my fingers to the glass and felt the cold press back. Somewhere across roofs and steeples, my father would be unlocking the church office with keys he'd earned by being a man people trusted. My mother would be laying out the good linen for the women's prayer circle, and Jacob would be riding a school bus with his jaw set like a tiny soldier. I whispered to the glass like it could carry a vow. You threw me away, I said to the town, to the kitchen, to the deadbolt. I'll learn to build with what's left. I didn't know yet that someday they would knock and find a door that did not open. I didn't know yet that numbers could become a blade. I didn't know yet about the basement brick or the letter waiting in a wall, about the name my grandmother never said out loud, about a pastor who would sit in a courtroom without his collar and learn what the word fall means when it stops being a season. I only knew this. The first door had closed. Another had swung open with a creak that sounded like fate remembering my name. Behind me, my son fussed, and I turned, and I began. The first night inside Martha's Haven tasted like metal. The radiator clanked as though it had arthritis, and every time it sighed, I thought someone was coming to take us away again. My son, Eli, woke every 40 minutes. His cries were sharp, not just hunger, but terror at being alive in a world colder than the womb. I rocked him in my arms, whispering lullabies stitched from fragments of my grandmother's hymns, the only ones I could remember without a hymnal. At 3 a.m., Keisha sat up in her bed, hair a wild halo against the dim yellow light. Girl, she muttered. He got lungs like a siren. If I don't sleep, you're sharing chores for a week. Sorry, I whispered. I'm trying. She stared at me. Her daughter curled against her chest. Then her eyes softened a fraction. We all tried. Doesn't matter. They scream until they learn you ain't leaving. She lay back down, pulling the blanket over her head. You'll learn too. The words clung to me as I paced the narrow hallway with Eli tucked against my collarbone. He smelled of sour milk and sweat, fragile and furious. I wanted to tell him I wasn't leaving, but my throat locked. I'd already been thrown away. Who was I to promise permanence? By dawn, exhaustion folded me like paper. The common room was crowded with other mothers and their children, the smell of burnt toast and baby wipes saturating the air. Deb handed me a chipped mug of coffee. Drink. You'll need both hands today. Why? I asked, bleary. Because the paperwork's just the prologue, she said. Now comes survival. Survival, it turned out, had rules posted on the bulletin board. Curfew at 9, chores on rotation, mandatory therapy twice a week. It wasn't prison, but it wasn't home either. I spent the morning filling out forms for government assistance while Eli squirmed in my lap. Each line cut me open. Monthly income, father's name, housing status. I wrote none so many times it became a brand. The caseworker didn't look up as she stamped my application. Food stamps approved, Medicaid pending. Formula vouchers will come in 2 weeks. Until then, share. Share. As if shame could be portioned like soup. The first person who showed me kindness without flinching was Carla. 19, with bleached hair and a scar under her eye. She carried her baby on her hip like an extra limb. She found me in the common room, trying to figure out how to mix powdered formula without clumps. You're shaking like you're diffusing a bomb, she said, plucking the bottle from my hands. Here. Cold water first, powder second. Swirl. Don't shake. Thanks, I murmured. She winked. First baby? I nodded. Don't worry. You'll stop crying every time he does after a week or two. Her joke didn't land. Maybe because I had cried last night for hours and didn't know when I'd stop. Nights at the shelter were worse. Babies crying, overlapped like bad orchestras. Mothers hissed at each other in the hall, about fridge space, about who used whose diapers. But Deb walked the corridors like a watchman, enforcing rules with a patience that sounded like steel. One night she caught me standing by the window, Eli cradled against my chest, staring at the town lights. Thinking of going back? She asked. They locked the door, I said. There's no back. Her eyes softened. Good. Then all that's left is forward. I found work through a flyer taped on the board. Night cleaning crew at Baxter offices. The hours were brutal. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. but Deb said they had emergency overnight childcare. Mrs. Harris, the supervisor, was in her 60s with a limp and a voice like gravel scraped over asphalt. She looked me up and down during orientation. "How old?" she asked, pointing at Eli in his carrier. 3 weeks. "And you're here?" "I need to work." She didn't smile, didn't pity me either. "Good. You got 3 hours for this floor. Trash, vacuum, wipe, scrub. Don't complain. Don't quit." "Questions?" "No." "Then get moving." Something in her indifference steadied me. She didn't see a tragedy. She saw a worker. The first night nearly broke me. My body wasn't healed from childbirth. My back screamed when I bent to scrub toilets. Blood stained my pad faster than I could change it. My arms shook as I lugged trash bags heavier than Eli. But when I stumbled back to the shelter at sunrise, he was still there, safe, asleep in the nursery crib. And that felt like victory. Mrs. Harris assigned me to the third-floor offices. That's where I noticed the books: accounting, management, finance. Heavy texts lined up on shelves like guards. During my break, instead of napping in the supply closet, I opened one. Numbers poured into my brain like a language I half remembered. Credits, debits, assets, liabilities. Everything neat, everything balanced. A world where mistakes could be corrected if you knew the formula. I began scribbling notes on paper towels with a stolen pencil. Back at the shelter, Kesha noticed my scribbles. "You studying for college or prison?" she asked, raising a brow. "Just trying to make sense of things." She snorted. "Girl, sense doesn't exist here. We live on chaos. Better learn to juggle." But I kept at it, night after night. 2 weeks in, something happened. While cleaning an executive's office, I found financial reports still open on the desk. The numbers screamed wrong at me. Vendor invoices duplicated. Totals that didn't balance. Without thinking, I left a sticky note. Check line item 7, 12, 19, double billing. I didn't sign it, just walked away. When Mrs. Harris cornered me the next week, my stomach dropped. "You the one leaving notes?" They want to know who. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't apologize. They were impressed. Keep doing it, quietly." I blinked. "Really?" She shoved a new ledger at me. "Think you're smart? Prove it." For the first time since my parents locked the deadbolt, I felt the faint tremor of something I hadn't touched in months. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. At the shelter, Eli screamed endlessly. His cries were needles in the walls, pricking every mother already exhausted. Marie, the single mom next door, slammed on the wall at 2 a.m. "Shut him up," she yelled. "Some of us gotta work." "I'm trying," I shouted back, bouncing him until my arms went numb. When I finally sank into the rocking chair in the common room, Carla found me there, eyes swollen, baby still shrieking. "First baby always feels like drowning," she said, sitting beside me. "But listen, you'll learn to float, or you'll sink. No third option." She lit a cigarette, then remembered the rules and tucked it back behind her ear. "I nearly sank too, you know. Thought about it 100 times, but this little guy?" She tapped her son's head. "He's my anchor. Yours will be too." Her words slipped into me like stones, heavy, but maybe grounding. On my 3rd week, I found Jacob's message. He'd slipped it through Sarah, my old best friend who barely spoke to me anymore. "Mom cries at night. Dad won't let her say your name. He says you're gone. But I know you're not. Are you okay?" Tears blurred the words. I wanted to tell him no, I wasn't okay, that my feet still bled, that Eli's formula was running out, that I was one rejection letter away from giving up. But I wrote back one word on a scrap of paper Sarah would deliver: surviving. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. That night, as I walked home from Baxter's offices with an accounting textbook hidden under my arm, the sunrise painted the sky pink. Eli slept against me, warm and heavy. For the first time, I whispered not to him, but to myself. "We'll make it." The wind carried the words away, but I swore the universe heard. The shelter blurred into a rhythm that felt less like living and more like treading water. Days stacked into each other, each one carrying the same hunger, the same exhaustion, the same bone-deep ache of pretending you weren't breaking. Eli's cries stitched the hours together, and sometimes I thought he was the only clock that mattered. Morning started with the clatter of mismatched spoons against chipped bowls, oatmeal that smelled faintly of disinfectant, and a dozen voices trying to negotiate whose turn it was for laundry or bathrooms. The bulletin board in the hallway was a battlefield of passive-aggressive notes. "Stop stealing my formula." 10 minutes in the shower means 10 minutes, not 20. If your kid throws up, clean it yourself. I learned fast that survival wasn't just about diapers and jobs, it was politics. One Tuesday, Deb called me into her office, which was really just a broom closet with a desk shoved inside. She pushed her glasses down her nose and held up my chore sheet. You skipped kitchen duty last week. I was working nights, I said. I got home at 6 a.m., and Eli, her eyebrow lifted. You think anyone here gets a pass because life's hard? Heat climbed my neck. No. She studied me for a long beat, then slid a pen across the desk. Good. Sign up for an extra slot this week. You want to stay? You pull your weight. Everybody's drowning here, but we still pass the buckets. I signed, because what else could I do? Kitchen duty paired me with Carla again. She was humming off key while chopping vegetables that came from cans, her son Tyler strapped to her back with a faded scarf. Thought you'd bail after 1 week, she said, not looking up. Why? Most do. Some can't hack the rules. Some can't hack the shame. Some think their baby drowns louder than everyone else's, so they leave. She set the knife down and turned to me, eyes sharp. But you stayed. That means something. What does it mean? That you might actually survive. Her words were blunt, but they lit something inside me. Survival sounded small to most people, but here it was a victory parade. Nights at Baxter's grew stranger. I cleaned offices until my fingers were raw, but my eyes kept wandering back to the ledgers. Numbers began to whisper. I'd catch errors no one else seemed to see, totals that didn't match, vendors who billed twice. I left more notes. Quiet, careful. One night, Mrs. Harris cornered me in the supply closet, her limp more pronounced after climbing the stairs. She shoved a file at me. They're testing you, she said. See if you're worth the trouble. I opened it. Balance sheets, messy, with red ink scrawled across the margins. What do you want me to do? She leaned against the wall, arms folded. Tell me what's wrong with it. 10 minutes. My pulse spiked. I traced the numbers with trembling fingers. Vendor invoices are duplicated here. Expenses miscategorized here. And this? I tapped the bottom line. This total doesn't even match their own math. She grunted. Huh, you're better than their interns, and you don't even cost them a coffee. Am I in trouble? I asked. No, you're in debt, to yourself. You want more than scrubbing toilets? Then keep reading those books. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. My daughter's an accountant. Makes 6 figures. She tells people her mom's retired, but I'm still cleaning her damn office. She met my eyes. Don't end up like me. Use that brain. Her words echoed louder than the mop bucket sloshing down the hall. At the shelter, Keisha noticed I'd started staying up after shifts, scribbling on scraps of paper towels instead of sleeping. What's that? She asked, half curious, half annoyed. Accounting exercises, I admitted. She rolled her eyes. Figures. You're the nerd type. Thought your kind didn't get pregnant. I stiffened. I wasn't... The word choice stuck in my throat. I didn't tell her the truth, not yet. Some truths were too jagged to offer in casual conversation. Kesha shrugged. Whatever, just don't expect it to save you. The world doesn't care if you're smart when you're broke. But I couldn't stop. Numbers were the only place my life made sense. In numbers, mistakes could be balanced. In numbers, nothing was wasted. Everything had a place. Therapy sessions were mandatory. We sat in a circle of folding chairs in the basement, babies fussing on laps. A volunteer counselor named Patricia tried to coax us into talking. How are we feeling today? Like shit, muttered Marie, bouncing her colicky newborn. Any wins this week? Patricia asked, too chipper. I didn't kill my kid, Keisha said flatly. That count? Patricia faltered, but I laughed, and others did too. Sometimes humor was the only knife sharp enough to cut through the heaviness. When it was my turn, Patricia looked at me expectantly. Vesper? I swallowed. I started working, at night, cleaning offices. That's wonderful, she said brightly. How does it make you feel? Like I'm still drowning, I admitted. But at least now I'm kicking. Jacob's letters came sporadically, smuggled through Sarah. One week he sent a drawing of a basketball hoop with, I made the team, scrawled underneath. Another time, a note. Dad won't let me say your name, but I whisper it anyway. Eli has a cousin now. I'll tell him about you someday. I read those notes until the paper softened. They were proof that not everyone in my family had chosen silence. Proof that I still existed outside these walls. Carla began to open up more too. One night, while we folded laundry in the common room, she pointed to the scar under her eye. My ex gave me that. Threw a bottle when I told him I was keeping Tyler. Said no one would want a girl dumb enough to raise a kid alone. What did you do? I asked. Left. After he pushed me down the stairs. Took a cop showing up to convince me I wasn't the crazy one. She shrugged. My parents said I made my bed. That's how I ended up here. Her story sat heavy in my chest. It wasn't so different from mine. Abandonment wrapped in piety instead of violence. Different weapons, same war. By the end of my first month, I had saved $47. It wasn't much, barely anything. But when I laid the crumpled bills inside a tampon box under my bed, it felt like planting a seed. Kesha caught me once, sliding the box shut. You hiding money? She asked. I froze. Relax. Everyone does it. Otherwise it disappears. You want to keep it safe? Hide it in a diaper box. Nobody steals those. It was the closest thing to advice she'd ever given me. One night, walking back from Baxter's with Eli asleep against me, I passed the church. Its steeple cut into the night sky like a blade. The windows glowed, hymn voices spilling into the street. I froze under the lamplight, my breath misting. Inside, my father's baritone would be booming out forgiveness songs while my mother clutched her Bible like a shield. I wanted to scream at the stained glass. Forgiveness is easy when you never have to use it. Instead, I kept walking. Eli stirred and sighed against my chest, a reminder that I couldn't afford to waste oxygen on rage. Not yet. But I made myself a quiet promise under that steeple. Someday, I would walk through those doors again, not as their shame, but as something they couldn't ignore. At the shelter that night, Carla caught me staring at Eli as he slept. You look scared, she said. I am, I admitted. What if I'm not enough? She smirked, not unkindly. You're never enough alone. That's why we're here. But you'll get stronger, strong enough to make them sorry. Sorry? Sorry they threw you out. Sorry they ever doubted you. Trust me, Vesper. The day will come. Her certainty shook me, because for the first time, I wanted to believe it. The second month in the shelter stripped away whatever illusions I still carried about dignity. Dignity didn't survive when you had to sign your name beneath the words, no income, no assets. It didn't survive when you begged a caseworker for more formula vouchers and were told, 2 weeks, try to stretch what you have. But dignity wasn't gone. It just hid in strange places. Sometimes it lived in the way you folded a second-hand shirt until it looked new. Sometimes it lived in the way you whispered your son's name like it was made of gold. Eli was crying less by then, though his whimpers still woke half the house. The other mothers complained, but less often. I noticed them softening, even Marie. One night she slipped a pacifier through my door without a word. I stared at it like it was treasure. Sometimes Mercy looked like plastic and silicone. Classes at community college were never part of my plan, at least not anymore. But Mrs. Harris cornered me after a shift, waving one of the textbooks I'd borrowed. You understand this stuff? She asked. Some of it, I said, embarrassed. I'm trying. She tapped the cover. Principles of Accounting. Community college has a night course. Go. Don't waste that brain-cleaning toilets. I can't afford it. Financial aid, she snapped. Scholarships. Figure it out. Or stay here forever. Your choice. I carried her words with me, heavier than the mop bucket I dragged down the hall. That night, while Eli slept in his crib at the shelter, I looked up the course catalog on an ancient desktop in the common room. ACC 101, Introduction to Accounting. Tuesday, 7 p.m. The thought felt impossible. Classes while raising a newborn, while working nights? But impossible was already my life. Jacob's next note arrived 2 days later, smuggled again through Sarah. Mom pretends you don't exist. Dad prays louder. But I still keep your picture in my math book. Eli looks like you? I pressed the note against my lips until the ink blurred. He was 12, too young to be a conspirator, too old not to be. I wrote back, he has your smile. Stay safe. I love you. I couldn't tell him more, not yet. Carla noticed the change in me before anyone else. You got a secret, she said one evening as we washed dishes, her son Tyler gnawing on a spoon beside her. No. Yes, you walk lighter. Don't lie. Shelter makes most of us walk heavier, but you've got something in your pocket. I thought of the enrollment form I hadn't turned in yet, folded tight in my jacket. It's nothing. She snorted. Fine, don't tell me. Just remember, secrets eat you if you don't spit them out. Her words echoed louder later when I sat in the rocking chair with Eli and stared at that folded paper. Maybe she was right. Or maybe this was the kind of secret that could save me. The shelter's therapy sessions dug deeper than I liked. One week, Patricia asked us to write letters to the people who had abandoned us. Keisha ripped hers in half before finishing. "Why waste ink?" she muttered. Marie burned hers over a candle in the common room sink. I folded mine into the pages of the textbook Mrs. Harris had loaned me. I wrote, "You said I made my choice. You never asked what was taken from me. Someday, you'll need me. And when that day comes, I won't forget this night." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even closure, but it was a vow. Carla's story unraveled in fragments, like thread pulled from a frayed sleeve. She told me her ex still called sometimes, threatening to take Tyler. He had money, lawyers. She had nothing. "What if he wins?" I asked once. She shrugged, but her eyes darkened. "Then I disappear. He can't chase what he can't find." It was said like a plan, not a fear. I didn't push her. I knew what it meant to live with escape as your only strategy. By March, I'd saved $200. It sat in the tampon box beneath my bed, hidden like contraband. I added bills slowly, each one wrinkled, each one proof that maybe someday Eli and I could buy a door with a lock of our own. Keisha caught me counting once. "What you gonna do with it?" she asked, arms crossed. "Get out." Everyone says that. But I will. She studied me, then gave a small, crooked smile. "If anyone can, it's you." The words felt like an anointing. At Baxter's, the whispers grew. The executives had noticed the anonymous notes. Mrs. Harris warned me to be careful. "They like your corrections, but they don't like knowing who made them. Power doesn't like mirrors." I asked her why she protected me. "Because someone should," she said, "and because I see a little of myself in you, except you still got time." Her words scared me. Time was a fragile thing in the shelter. One wrong turn, and it vanished. I finally turned in the enrollment form at the community college. The admissions clerk looked at me, baby strapped to my chest, hair greasy from work, and her eyes softened in that way that made me both grateful and furious. "You'll need financial aid," she said. "I'll figure it out." She stamped the form. "Classes start in 2 weeks. Good luck." Good luck. 2 words that sounded both flimsy and enormous. Back at the shelter, I told Carla, "I'm starting classes." She whistled. "Accounting girl, look at you." "I don't know if I can do it," I admitted. "You already are," she said simply. Keisha overheard and rolled her eyes. "School won't change the fact you got a kid at 18. "No," I said, holding Eli close. "But maybe it'll change what kind of 18-year-old mother I am." She didn't answer, but for once, she didn't argue. The night before classes began, I walked past the church again. Lights blazed inside, my father's silhouette visible at the pulpit. My mother sat in her usual spot, head bowed. I stood in the shadows, Eli asleep in the sling against my chest. For a moment, I almost stepped inside, almost screamed at them that I wasn't gone, that I was fighting, that their grandson was alive and breathing right here. But instead, I turned and kept walking. Because the next time they saw me, it wouldn't be as a ghost at their service. It would be as something stronger, something undeniable. The impossible wasn't walking back through their door. The impossible was making sure they one day knocked on mine. Moving out of the shelter felt less like freedom and more like peeling off a scab. Raw, terrifying, and bleeding possibility. It took me 8 months of working nights, hiding bills in tampon boxes, and skipping meals to scrape together the $2,800 for a deposit, first month and last month's rent. Every dollar was a battle. Every dollar meant Eli ate while I chewed gum. Every dollar meant we might not always have to share a bathroom with 12 other women. The apartment I found wasn't much. 3rd floor of a crumbling brick building where the paint curled off the door frames and the stairwell smelled like mildew. The landlord didn't ask questions, just counted the cash and handed me a key with a chipped blue tag. When I opened the door for the first time, Eli balanced on my hip, babbling nonsense syllables that sounded suspiciously like laughter. The place had water stains on the ceiling and a kitchen so small I could touch both walls with my arms spread. But it was ours. That very morning, Eli let go of the coffee table in the shelter's common room and took 3 unsteady steps toward me. "Oh my God!" Jessica, the 15-year-old with twins, shrieked. "He's walking!" I caught him before he toppled, and he giggled like conquering the floor was the grandest trick in the world. His first steps and my first apartment happened on the same day. Both felt like fragile miracles. The move out was bittersweet. Carla hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. "Don't forget us little people," she joked, though her eyes were wet. I'll never forget, I promised. But even as I said it, I knew the shelter was a place you survived, not a place you stayed tethered to. Survivors move forward, even if it meant leaving behind the only people who'd understood. Keisha smirked at me as I lugged the last bag down the hall. Well, accounting girl, go prove us wrong. Make the world eat its words. For once, she sounded proud. The first night in the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. No babies crying down the hall, no footsteps on the stairwell, no voices bickering in the kitchen. Just me, Eli, and a window overlooking a scraggly tree where birds nested in tangled branches. I put him in his crib, our crib, in his own closet-sized room, and sat on the living room floor with a carton of Chinese takeout that cost $11 I couldn't spare. I ate it anyway. A celebration feast. We did it, I whispered to the walls. We actually did it. By then, I'd secured part-time bookkeeping work through Mr. Chin's construction company. His wife, Mrs. Chin, had recognized me from church, but didn't sneer the way I expected. Instead, she'd said quietly, "Your parents are fools. When can you start?" The office smelled of sawdust and ink, and my days were filled with ledgers, invoices, and the soothing order of numbers. At night, I still cleaned offices with Mrs. Harris, but now I walked taller. Mrs. Harris noticed. "You're different," she said one night, studying me as I vacuumed. "I have an apartment," I said. She grunted, but her lips twitched. "Good. Don't waste it." Community college classes were harder than I'd imagined. I failed my first quiz. Sat in the back of the classroom, Eli asleep in his carrier, while my professor, Martinez, handed me the paper with a red F circled at the top. "See me after class," he said. When everyone else filed out, I lingered, cheeks hot. "I'm sorry," I blurted. "I'm working nights, and I don't want apologies," he said, voice even. "I want to know if you're wasting your time, and mine." Something in me snapped. I'm not wasting anything. I scrub toilets 10 hours a night. I live on canned soup so my son can have formula. I haven't slept in more than 2 hours straight in months. But I'm here. I'm trying. That F will be my last one. He studied me for a long moment, then pulled a card from his wallet. "My wife runs a tutoring center. Tell her I sent you. First 5 sessions are free." I left with Eli's carrier heavier than ever, but for the first time I carried more than exhaustion. I carried proof that someone believed I might succeed. Mrs. Martinez welcomed us into the tutoring center like we weren't burdens. She set up a pack and play in the corner for Eli and handed me fresh pencils. "Babies are welcome here," she said simply. "Learning doesn't stop for life." Those sessions saved me, not just academically, but mentally. For 2 hours twice a week, I wasn't just a single mother scraping by. I was a student again, someone who could add, calculate, understand. Eli grew fast. His laughter filled the apartment, ricocheting off the peeling paint like sunlight. He called Mrs. Chin Grandma Chun because she insisted, spoiling him with dumplings and red envelopes on Lunar New Year. I watched him toddle through her office like he belonged, like family could be found where blood had failed. One evening, as I balanced a ledger at my desk, Mrs. Chin stopped beside me. "You're good," she said. "I'm learning," I replied. "No," she corrected gently. "You're better than you know." Jacob's letters kept coming. The latest one was different. Inside the envelope was cash, 5 $20 bills folded tight. The note read, "Mowing lawns after school. For Eli. Love, Uncle Jake." I cried so hard that night, Eli crawled into my lap and patted my face as if trying to fix me. "Mama sad?" he asked, voice still soft with toddlerhood. "No, baby," I whispered, holding him close. "Mama's grateful." By my second year, I had enough references to move from office cleaner to assistant bookkeeper at another company. More pay, fewer hours, scrubbing toilets. My professors started to notice my grades climbing. I noticed the way people spoke to me differently once I carried a clipboard instead of a mop. But dignity, fragile as it was, came with a price. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. Every time I passed the church, my chest tightened. I thought of my parents sitting inside, still pretending I'd moved away for college, erasing me as efficiently as a forged signature. I didn't know then that their house of cards was already trembling. One night, as I closed the office, Mr. Chin handed me a folder. "Financial records from the church," he said, his face tight. "They've asked us to bid on a new community center, but something feels off. I want you to review these." My fingers shook as I opened the folder. At the bottom of the first page was my father's signature. The folder trembled in my hands, as if it carried a pulse. My father's name, written in his deliberate, blocky script, stared up at me like an accusation. Treasurer. Board of Directors. His signature threaded through columns of numbers that prickled in my chest like static. At first glance, they looked polished. Neat totals, invoices stamped, vendor names tidy in ink. But the longer I stared, the more wrong they felt. Money looping in circles. Projects in progress that hadn't moved in years. Vendors I'd never heard of billing exact round sums. I snapped the folder shut before my stomach could empty itself. "Anything wrong?" Mr. Chin asked. "I'll need to study it," I said carefully. "But yes, something's wrong." He nodded, grim. "That's what I thought. We'll be pulling our bid." He didn't press me further, and I didn't tell him that these weren't just irregularities. They were fingerprints. My father's. Pastor Harold's. The same men who had locked me out into the November cold were now tangled in numbers that smelled like rot. 2 weeks later, the knock came at my apartment door. Evening. Eli was at the table, tongue sticking out as he carefully traced crooked letters across a worksheet. E-L-I. His handwriting looked like caterpillars drunk on ink, but my chest swelled watching him form his own name. Through the peephole, I saw them. My parents. Smaller than I remembered. Older. My mother clutched her purse to her chest like armor. My father's tie was crooked. His shoulders stooped. Ghosts of the people who once claimed to love me. I almost didn't open the door, but curiosity, or maybe cruelty, pulled me to undo the chain, though I left the door half closed. "What do you want?" My voice came out colder than the Michigan wind. My father cleared his throat. "We need to talk." 2.5 years of silence, and now you need to talk? I laughed, sharp. "About what?" "The church," my mother said, her voice fragile. "It's being audited. Harold was arrested." Her eyes darted past me to where Eli sat, crayons scattered across the table. He looked up, curious, but I shifted, blocking her view. "And you thought of me?" I asked. "Funny, you didn't think of me when I was bleeding through socks, walking 3 miles to a shelter with a newborn." My father flinched. "Things have changed." "No," I said, stepping into the hallway, pulling the door almost shut behind me. "Things have broken. That's different." "We need someone who understands finances," he said. "Someone we can trust." The word trust cracked something inside me. "Family?" I spat. "You stopped being family the night you changed the locks." My mother's eyes brimmed. "We made mistakes." "Mistakes?" My laughter was bitter. "Forgetting to buy milk is a mistake. Throwing your daughter out with her newborn in November? That's a choice." Eli called from inside. "Mama!" "I'm here, baby." My voice softened through the door, then snapped hard again as I turned back to them. "You've had your 2 minutes. Leave." But my father pressed on, desperation bleeding into his words. "Vesper, please. If the audit shows, if Harold drags us down, everything could collapse. The community, the church, our home." "Our home?" The word tasted sour. "You forfeited that phrase when you turned a key against me." My mother reached out then, a trembling hand, but stopped short of touching my arm. "We want to make it right." "Then vanish," I said, voice steady. "That's the only right left." I shut the door before their tears could finish falling. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, Eli asleep in the next room, the folder from Mr. Chin spread before me. I traced my father's signature again and again, the loops and lines like bars on a cage. I thought of Jacob, still living under their roof, still absorbing their silence, still whispering my name in math class. I thought of the sermon voices, the third pew where we once sang about grace. I thought of Harold's smirk the last night I saw him, standing behind my father like a shadow puppeteer. And then I thought of something else, leverage. For the first time, I realized their abandonment had given me more than scars. It had given me freedom. I wasn't tied to their reputation. I wasn't part of their polished facade, which meant I could see what others couldn't. They came to me begging, but they didn't know what I already held in my hands. 3 days later, Jacob slipped another note through Sarah. "Mom and Dad whisper a lot. Something about money gone. Dad keeps saying your name like it's poison. Are you okay?" I wrote back, "I'm better than okay. I'm ready." I didn't tell him what for. Not yet. But the night I pressed that reply into Sarah's palm, I made myself a promise. The next time my parents came to my door, they wouldn't just be desperate, they would be exposed. Because the numbers didn't lie. And for once in my life, neither would I. The next time they knocked, they didn't come alone. It was a Thursday evening, and Eli was at the table again, practicing his letters with fierce concentration. His S looked like a snake with scoliosis, but I cheered anyway. He beamed, dimples flashing, proud of himself in a way only a child can be. The knock was sharp, official. Through the peephole, I saw my parents flanking a man in a suit, his leather briefcase gleaming under the hallway light. Instinct screamed lawyer. I cracked the door, chain still on. I told you not to come back. The man slipped a card through the gap. William Torrington, your parents retained me regarding your grandmother's estate. My chest tightened. Grandma Eleanor. Gone since I was 15, but never really gone. Her laugh still echoed in the kitchen where we baked pies. Her hands smelled of lavender and flour. The mention of her name was a key turning inside my rib cage. I unhooked the chain. 10 minutes, I said, no more. They filed in. My mother's eyes darted to Eli, who looked up, curious. She half reached, but I intercepted. Eli, baby, go play in your room for a bit. Okay, Mama. He gathered his crayons and shuffled down the hall, obedient as always. When his door clicked shut, I crossed my arms. Talk. The lawyer opened his briefcase, produced a sheaf of documents. Your grandmother established a trust in your name when you were born. $50,000, intended to mature when you turned 18. It was terminated 2 weeks after your birthday. Funds transferred to an account that was subsequently closed. He slid a paper forward. This is the termination form. The signature appears to be yours. My pulse roared in my ears. I snatched the paper. My name sat there in ink, stiff and lifeless, a parody of my handwriting. That's not mine. You're certain? I laughed bitterly. I was hiding morning sickness, finishing high school, trying to breathe. I didn't even know the trust existed. The lawyer looked from me to my parents. Silence stretched. Finally, my father cleared his throat. Harold said, his voice faltered, he said a teenage mother with that much money would squander it. He suggested we protect it for you. I froze. You stole from me. We were going to give it back, my mother whispered, her voice breaking, when you were older, more stable. My hands shook. I walked 3 miles bleeding through hospital pads. I fed my son watered-down formula because I couldn't afford more. And you had $50,000 of my money sitting in a church account? My father's face tightened. It wasn't like that. No? My voice rose, ragged. Then tell me what it was like, Dad. Tell me how watching Harold forge my signature and funnel my future into his pockets was protection. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Miss Richardson, if the signature is demonstrably forged, we can pursue recovery. There may even be grounds for criminal. Against who? I demanded. Harold's already in prison. Did either of you pick up the pen? My father's voice dropped. He signed it. We watched. My throat burned. You thought you were protecting me? No, you were punishing me. Don't dress it up as anything else. The lawyer cleared his throat. There's more. In addition to the trust, there are irregularities concerning your grandmother's estate. We believe assets remain unaccounted for. I narrowed my eyes. What kind of irregularities? My mother reached into her purse with trembling fingers and pulled out an envelope. Yellowed paper, my name written in Grandma Eleanor's looping script. She left you this. We didn't give it to you before. Harold said it would confuse things. I stared at it, my grandmother's handwriting, my name, untouched. My throat went dry. You kept her letter from me. My voice was quiet, lethal. You let Harold tell you what I should and shouldn't know. I snatched the envelope, clutched it like a grenade. Get out. Vesper, my mother pleaded. No, you've taken enough. Get out of my home. I opened the door, gestured toward the hall. Mr. Torrington, you can contact me directly. Don't bring them again. They filed out, but not before my mother stole one last look at Eli's closed bedroom door. Her hand shook as if she might knock. She didn't. When the door shut, I leaned against it, the envelope burning in my palm. It sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days. I fed Eli, folded laundry, balanced ledgers, but my eyes always strayed to it, afraid, because sometimes the truth is worse than the lie. On the 3rd day, while Eli napped, I slid it open. My dearest Vesper, it began. If you're reading this, you are 18 and I am gone. I fear your parents will not give you this easily, but I pray they did. There is money, yes, but there is something greater. Check the loose brick in the basement wall of the old hardware store, behind the paint supplies. There you will find the truth of your real inheritance. Be brave, my darling girl, braver than those who came before. The women in our family always were, even when we had to hide it. Trust Mr. Winslow at Winslow and Associates. He will guide you. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. The paper shook in my hands. The hardware store. The place where I'd played hide and seek between nails and screws, where my father had taught me to sweep floors as though dust was sin. Now it held something buried. My grandmother had known. She'd hidden truth in bricks and ink, and she'd trusted me, not my father, not Harold, not the church. Me. That night I stared at the envelope, my hands trembling, and whispered to myself, the past isn't dead. It's waiting. The hardware store hadn't been mine for years, but I still had the key. I'd hidden it in my jewelry box like a relic, maybe because some part of me knew I'd return. On a gray Sunday evening, with Eli at Mrs. Chun's apartment eating dumplings and watching cartoons, I stood at the boarded-up storefront, heart hammering like I was about to commit a crime. The lock was stiff but yielded, complaining with a rusty groan. Inside, the air smelled of dust and abandonment. The shelves were mostly bare, the walls stained with sun-faded outlines of where hammers and screws had once hung. It should have been familiar, but the silence made it foreign. My phone's flashlight cut a trembling beam through the dark as I descended the basement steps. The basement was colder than memory. Cobwebs stretched across corners like forgotten warnings. The paint supply shelves sagged under the weight of cans no one had bought in years. I ran my hands along the bricks, tapping gently. One wiggled. My breath caught. Behind it, wrapped in plastic, was a small metal box. My fingers shook as I pried it free. Inside were photographs, documents, and another envelope. The first photo nearly stopped my heart. Grandma Eleanor, young, smiling in a sepia dress beside a man I didn't recognize. She cradled a baby, my father, unmistakably him, though smaller, softer. The back read in pencil, Eleanor and Thomas, with baby Richard, 1977. My breath turned jagged. Thomas? Not the man I'd grown up calling Grandpa. The documents confirmed it. Adoption papers. My father had been adopted at 6 months by the man I thought was my grandfather. His biological father, Thomas, had died in Vietnam before my father was born. But it wasn't the adoption that undid me. It was the bank statements, page after page, accounts in Eleanor's maiden name, investments stretching back decades. A widow's pension that had grown into properties, stocks, bonds, a quiet fortune hidden behind her homemaker's smile. The second letter was shorter. Vesper, if you found this, you're searching for truth. Your grandfather never knew about Thomas or the money. He was a good man, but traditional. He wouldn't have understood why I needed something of my own. Pastor Harold knows. He's been blackmailing me for years, threatening to expose Richard's adoption. I paid him to keep silent, but I'm dying now, and secrets die unless someone chooses otherwise. The real inheritance isn't the trust they know about. Go to Mr. Winslow, account number 78345521. Password, Thomas 1977. It's yours. Protect it. Burn this after reading. Love, Grandma. I didn't burn it. I photographed every page, every line. The truth was fuel, and I wasn't about to waste it. I called Jacob that night. When he picked up, his voice cracked with surprise. Vesper? It's me. My throat tightened. I found something. About Dad. About Grandma. About Harold. What? I can't explain everything over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow at the store? He hesitated. It's in foreclosure. We're not supposed... Jacob, my voice cut sharp. Can you or not? I'll figure it out. His tone shifted, steadier. Yeah, I'll come. Mr. Winslow's house smelled of pipe smoke and old books. He opened the door in a cardigan older than I was. His eyes were clear, unsurprised. I was wondering when you'd come. He ushered me inside, sat me at a mahogany desk littered with papers. Your grandmother trusted you, he said. She prepared for Harold's greed. She left me instructions. He slid a folder across. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds. Numbers so large I had to blink twice. Nearly $1 million spread across accounts, all shielded under Eleanor's name. This is yours, he said, and eventually Jacob's. The weight of it pressed on me. Not just money, proof. Proof my parents had stolen, proof Harold had extorted, proof my grandmother had fought to protect us even from her grave. Can this bring Harold down? I asked. Winslow's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. With the right testimony? Yes, it could bury him. That night, I returned to the store with Jacob. He had shot up in height, nearly 6 feet now, his limbs awkward, his face shadowed by the beginnings of manhood. But his eyes were the same. He hugged me fiercely, whispering into my hair, "Everything's been wrong since you left." "Since they threw me out," I corrected gently. I showed him the photos, the adoption papers, the bank records. He sank onto the dusty floor, eyes wet. "Grandma was fighting for us all along." "She was," I said, "and now it's our turn." He looked up, tears streaking his cheeks. "You're rich now." "We're rich," I corrected. "Half of this will be yours when you're 18. "But she left it to you." "She left it to the strong one." "But you're strong too, Jake. You're the one who kept writing me letters when everyone else erased me. You're the one who still believes in family, even when it hurts. That's strength." We sat there in the cold basement, surrounded by the ghosts of our family's lies, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I called William Torrington the next morning. "I want to buy the hardware store," I said. "Cash." He hesitated. "Why?" "Because this is where it ends, and where it begins." Then I lowered my voice. "And I want to hire you, not for my parents, for me, to bury Harold so deep he'll need a ladder to see hell." He was silent for a long moment, then, "I'm listening." I laid it all out. The forged trust termination, the blackmail payments, the hidden accounts. His tone sharpened with each revelation. "This isn't just fraud," he said finally. "This is racketeering, extortion, perhaps even manslaughter, if we can argue your grandmother's stress contributed to her death." "I don't care what you call it," I said. "I want him destroyed." "And your parents?" I thought of Jacob, of my mother's trembling hands, of my father's hollow eyes. They're victims and culprits both. I want them to face consequences, but not prison. Jacob doesn't deserve to lose everything. "You're more generous than they deserve." "No," I said, "I'm practical. Because mercy and revenge aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same weapon, wielded differently." The courthouse smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper, like somewhere pain was dressed up in sober drapery and given a chance at being heard. I sat in the gallery with Jacob beside me, his knee bumping mine like a small, steady heartbeat. Down the row, Mrs. Chun had taken a seat and waved at Eli when he waved back, a grin of someone who had quietly chosen family without asking permission. Professor Martinez and his wife sat 2 rows ahead, the tutoring card folded in the pocket of her coat like a talisman. Carla was there too, Tyler tucked under her arm, cheeks flushed with the indignity of being presentable. Across the courtroom, Pastor Harold sat in orange, his collar gone, the smugness that had always lived on his face reduced to taut skin stretched over sharp cheekbones. He looked smaller than I'd imagined, less puppet master, more brittle actor whose script had run out. The judge, a woman with eyes like shutters that closed on nonsense, called the session to order. "State versus Harold Keene," she intoned. "Proceed." The prosecutor moved like a man who'd practiced grief and precision together. He called witnesses, built sequences, laid out paper trails as if each one were a bead on a string. Winslow testified about the hidden accounts. His voice was steady, the facts surgical. Mr. Chin described the invoices and odd vendors. Each page we presented was like another light flicking on in a dark house. Suddenly the corridors didn't feel so labyrinthine. When they called me, my chest pinched. I had practiced testimony with Torrington until my voice didn't tremble in the quiet of his office. But the courtroom has a different acoustics. It eats rehearsal and spits out reality. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Vesper Richardson," I answered. My voice echoed. My palms were dry. "Ms. Richardson, can you describe your relationship to the defendant?" He was the pastor at my parents' church. He advised my family and, eventually, handled financial matters. He visited our house. He told my parents what was godly and what was shameful. I watched him from the corner of my eye. Harold's jaw tightened, like something gearing up. "Did you learn about your grandmother's trust?" the prosecutor asked. "Not until years after," I inhaled. "When I was 18, my parents, under Harold's counsel, took me out of our home with a 3-day-old baby. They told people I had moved away for college. Meanwhile, funds that belonged to me were transferred, a trust terminated, and the money diverted." He pushed a document toward me, enlarged, the forged signature looming like a caricature of my name. "Can you identify this?" "It is a forgery." I felt a small, private rage at the precision with which someone could fake my future. "I was in my childhood bedroom when this was signed. I couldn't have signed this." "Did you ever give consent for a termination of your trust?" No. The room felt like a taut wire. I never knew there was a trust until 3 months ago. Under cross-examination, Harold's young lawyer tried to pull the thread of contradiction. He asked about my life choices, my pregnancy, insinuated, slid questions like knives that expected soft answers. Isn't it true you were a troubled teen? He prodded, voice syrupy. Isn't it true the father of your child did not support you? I had rehearsed this too. I held on to facts. I was raped, I said, clear as a bell. The words made a wind in the room. You could hear a pen drop. My mother made a noise like something breaking. The defense lawyer flinched, then smirked like he'd expected drama, but I was done with silence. There was no police report because I was afraid, because my parents had already decided I was sinful based on Harold's whisper. The judge's expression softened minutely. Perhaps the law is cold until human things intrude. Then Jacob took the stand. He had recorded the night they threw me out. The cruel sermonizing, my father's voice steeling itself into righteousness while Harold's measured tones layered poison over it. The prosecutor played the clip. There was my father's bark, "Get out," Harold's calm, menacing insistence, and my young voice pleading. The sound was small, but it was truth in a way prints on paper had never been. When the recording ended, Harold looked like a man whose hands had been held too close to flame. We had organized the financial evidence into a chronology. Payments from Eleanor's accounts into Harold-controlled entities, check after check, wire after wire, then transfers into Maple Suppliers LLC, a shell with no inventory and a treasurer on the township payroll. Winslow had traced IP addresses that tried to access the password-protected account on the night's papers were moved. The trail wound through Harold's office computer and, occasionally, the church network. It was a web, and we had a map. The defense tried to tremble moral high ground, religion, leadership, the sanctity of counsel. They played the victim of misinterpreted intentions. Harold's lawyer whispered that his client had been trusted, that payments were for consulting and stewardship. But custodianship has limits. Manipulation is not ministry. When the payments coincided with secrecy and threats, words couldn't house them anymore. My mother took the stand, and the theater of contrition was rawer than any fiction. Tears streamed from her eyes before she sat. She looked smaller than she'd ever looked. Not the woman who'd ironed my uniform or the woman who'd sat in the third pew. Instead, she seemed like someone hanging between the life she wanted and the life she had chosen to keep peace. "Why did you allow this to happen?" the prosecutor asked, not unkindly. Harried, trying to make explanations land, she spoke of fear. "Harold said I must," she faltered. "He said giving the money to an 18-year-old mother would be enabling sin. He said we had to protect our family." The words were dull, rehearsed. We thought we were protecting Vesper. "Did you see the forging?" the prosecutor pressed. She stared at her hands, long enough to sell the silence. "We watched him sign," she whispered. "We let him." The courtroom gave a sound like a barrier shifting. My father's shoulders sagged. It was one thing to be dragged before a judge. It was another to see the quiet arithmetic of your choices lay bare. He finally testified, voice tight and small, about fear and righteousness and the crushing demand to be seen as a good man in church. He did not say I was wrong in a way the court could measure. He spoke of obedience to counsel, of not wanting to cause scandal. The humanity of it was as damning as the charts. The defense tried to question my credibility, to paint me as a wayward woman whose choices led to consequences that might be regretted. But the paper trail was tenacious. Winslow's bank statements, the township treasurer's link to Maple Suppliers, the ledger entries, each number a small nail in a man's reputation. When the closing arguments came, the prosecutor's voice was like a bell. He spoke of betrayal not as a theological trait, but as a crime, extortion, fraud, conspiracy. He asked the jury to see Harold not as a shepherd, but as a man who used his power to seize another's life. The defense appealed to mercy and nuance, but mercy cannot be bought back with a forged check. We waited for what felt like an hour in the jury room while they deliberated. Outside, the courthouse hummed with lunchboxes and courthouse coffee. Inside, our small band held hands in ways subtle and ordinary, Mrs. Choon squeezing mine, Jacob's knuckles white. When the jurors filed in, faces unreadable, the judge asked for readiness. The foreman stood. Guilty on counts of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy, he said, his voice steady. I felt something unlatch in me. The word guilty landed like thunder and then like rain, cleansing, sharp. Harold sagged as if someone had knocked the air from him. He turned toward us, and for a moment his face looked human, small and broken. He mouthed something I couldn't catch, a prayer or a curse, I didn't know which. Outside the courthouse, the press circled like predictable birds, but the real thing was under my skin, the slow, seismic shift that happens when a story you once thought private becomes a public ledger. My parents left without speaking to me. My mother's hand brushed Jacob's shoulder. His face was unreadable. The town watched them as they shuffled away, a family more fragile than when I'd stepped onto their porch 3 years ago. That night, at home in my small apartment, Eli asleep in his crib, I sat at my kitchen table and let the verdict settle in like snow. Not vengeance, not triumph, a reckoning. The law had done what the house had not, named a man's crimes and given them weight. But the story did not end with a verdict. It would ripple. There would be civil suits, restitution calculations, and people rearranging their lives like dominoes. And I would have to decide what to do with what my grandmother had hidden for me, whether to use it for myself, for Jacob, for wider plans I had only just begun to articulate. The idea of a center, a space where mothers wouldn't be thrown out in the night, had begun to form like a sketch in my head. A place that smelled of paint and books and dumplings, a place that might have my grandmother's name whispered along its joists. Outside, in the dark, the town's steeple cut up at the sky. Inside, I opened a ledger and wrote one line. Willow House. Plan. Resource Center for Single Parents. I closed the book and held the pen for a long time. The impossible had been exposed. Now I had to build something impossible in its stead. The day Willow House opened, sunlight spilled through the dusty front windows like it was conspiring with me. The hardware store had been gutted, its bones scrubbed of cobwebs and Harold's shadow, its walls repainted with color that whispered hope instead of rot. Where tool racks had once hung, there were computers donated by Professor Martinez's wife's tutoring center. Where paint cans had sat in crooked rows, there was now a children's library with beanbags and shelves stacked with secondhand storybooks. And the basement, the place where my grandmother had hidden her truths, had been transformed into a nursing room with soft chairs and quilts made by volunteers who wanted to believe in second chances. The sign above the door read, Willow House, where new stories begin, in memory of Eleanor Foster Richardson. I stood at the entrance with Eli, now 4, his hand clutching mine. He wore the little cape Mrs. Chun had sewn him, blue fabric with a gold star on the back. He tugged me toward the ribbon strung across the doorway. Mama, can I cut it? Of course, I said, pressing the plastic scissors into his hand. His eyes shone as he snipped through, the crowd clapping like the sound itself might lift us higher. Inside, people filled the space, former shelter mothers, social workers, volunteers, curious neighbors. Carla was there, Tyler on her hip, looking stronger than she ever had at the shelter. She had tears in her eyes as she whispered, You did it. No, I corrected, pulling her into a hug. We did it. My parents came too. I hadn't invited them, but Jacob begged me. They hovered on the sidewalk, dressed in church clothes that seemed wrong for a Thursday afternoon, clutching a gift bag trembling between their hands. They looked like ghosts, desperate to be noticed by the living. You can come in, I called from the doorway. It's a public space. They stepped cautiously inside, eyes darting over the walls, the children's corner, the bulletin board filled with schedules and phone numbers for free legal aid. My father's mouth opened, but no words came. My mother pressed the gift bag into my hands. It held a children's book, brand new, its glossy cover glaring among our donated paperbacks. I looked at her face, ravaged by years of regret. You can leave it at the front desk, I said. I'll decide if he gets it. That's fair, she whispered. More than fair. Her gaze strayed to Eli, who was showing Tyler the reading corner with solemn pride. She trembled, but didn't approach. The dedication ceremony was brief. I stood at the podium, Eli on my hip, his cape brushing against my arm. The local newspaper clicked photos. 4 years ago, I began. my voice steadier than I felt. I stood on a porch with nothing but a newborn and a bag of diapers. My family had locked the door. My church had turned its back. But strangers opened theirs. A shelter gave me walls. A supervisor gave me work. A professor gave me a chance. And from that, we built this. I paused, catching sight of Jacob in the front row, taller now, his scholarship acceptance letter folded in his pocket like a promise. He smiled at me, pride radiating in a way that made every sleepless night worth it. This house isn't just for me, I continued. It's for every mother who's been told she's a mistake, for every child who's been called an accident, for every girl who thinks being thrown away means she can't be found. This is where we begin again. The applause was thunder, but all I could hear was Eli whispering, "Mama, we did it!" After the crowd thinned, I found my parents standing in the corner, watching Eli race around with Tyler, cape fluttering like a flag. My mother's eyes brimmed. "He looks like Jacob at that age," she whispered. "You don't get to claim that," I said softly. "You forfeited it the night you closed the door." My father cleared his throat, his voice rough. "We know. We live with it every day." "That's your penance," I said, "not mine." For the first time, he didn't argue. Weeks later, the center was humming. Carla started leading parenting classes in the basement. Mrs. Chun donated desks for the tutoring program Jacob ran on weekends. The children's corner became the loudest place in the building, laughter bouncing off the walls like music. One evening, a girl came in, 17, belly round with pregnancy, eyes hollow with fear. She whispered, "My parents gave me a week to figure it out or leave." I guided her to a chair, remembering my own first night. "First, we'll make sure you have shoes that fit," I said. "Then we'll handle the rest." She frowned, confused, until I explained about the bloody socks I'd worn when I walked to the shelter. Her shoulders eased. Sometimes survival begins with something as small as socks. That night, after Eli was asleep in the tiny office we'd turned into a nap room, I sat at the desk in what used to be the cashier's corner of the hardware store. The ledger lay open. At the top of the page, in my neat handwriting, I'd written, "Willow House, impossible made real." I thought of Harold rotting in prison, of the forged signature that had once erased me, of my parents watching from the margins as their daughter built what they had tried to bury. But mostly I thought of my grandmother, the woman who had hidden secrets in bricks and money in shadows, the woman who had trusted me to find it. She was right. The women in our family had always been strong, even when we had to hide it. I whispered into the quiet, "We're not hiding anymore." Eli stirred, half asleep, mumbling, "Love you, Mama," to the moon. I bent to kiss his forehead. "To the stars and back, baby." In that moment, surrounded by the hum of heaters and the smell of fresh paint, I realized something. Survival wasn't the impossible thing. Thriving was. Building was. Turning abandonment into architecture, betrayal into blueprints. And that's what Willow House was, a monument to the truth my family tried to erase, proof that what they cast out had become unshakable. Some doors, once closed, never open again, and some children, once thrown away, grow up to build their own doors and leave them wide open for everyone else.